All right. All right.
Hello, welcome everybody to the Energy Realities podcast and our fantastic and knowledgeable team. We have the ever witty Irina Slav, the compiler of absurdities, David Blackmon, the irrepressible Stu Turley, and me, the discerning Tammy Nemeth. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Good morning.
So, today our topic is modeling, not the catwalk variety, not the Zoolander kind, but the computer kind. The unreliable, garbage in, garbage out kind of modeling. And this topic was actually inspired by a recent announcement from Microsoft. So if you thought Microsoft was bad for glitches and unexpected crashes, and that computer modeling for climate was prone to significant error, now imagine what happens when those two things combine. Because Microsoft has a new sustainability manager that uses climate modeling and whatnot to determine the emissions impact of business decisions. So I'm just trying to imagine how great this is going to be for companies to combine those two uncertainties.
Yeah, I mean, what's going to happen to you when it gets hacked? It always amazes me. People rely on Bill Gates and Microsoft, for stuff like this. When Bill Gates intentionally designed a platform that is vulnerable to being hacked and refuses to fix it. I would assume that this tool would be about as valuable as anything else Microsoft puts out.
Yeah. Irina, what did you think of that article about the...
It was amusing, certainly, but my biggest problem with these computer models is that it's humans that input information and parameters and whatever it is. And humans are not without bias. All of us have biases. So how do you guarantee that the people doing the inputs into these computer models are not manipulating these inputs to get the result they want to get? Can this be guaranteed?
Right. And what's the margin of error on any of it?
Well, I'm not talking about margin of error. I'm talking about conscious or unconscious, but rather conscious bias that is being included in the modeling because the authors of the models want to get a certain result.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'm just being paranoid and, too suspicious of everything. I am suspicious of technology for precisely the reasons pointed out by you already. And the fact that we have a human factor, and it's crucial, this human factor, because the computers don't create the models on their own. Even artificial intelligence, as we saw, remember the Gemini, Google's chatbot or whatever? It was so heavily biased, they pulled it
they had
back
to pull it.
almost immediately. It was amazing. So
and
I have issues with
it's like relying on, if you're a conservative, it's like relying on CNN to conduct a presidential preference poll. If you're a liberal, it's like relying on Fox News, right? I mean, you don't trust it because of the source. And public opinion polling works essentially the same way as these climate models work. They're and unfortunately, there's also this general misperception in the media about how to portray climate models, the outcomes of climate models. And we see that with the IPCC modeling process every year, because if you actually read the details of the UN IPCC annual studies that they do, they very rationally write about what the findings mean and what they don't mean. Okay. And they put probabilities of outcomes into all the scenarios. They'll run various different scenarios with different inputs. to come up, and they always come up with a wide variety of outcomes, possible outcomes. But in the media, the headline is always the most extreme thing is going to be true, right? I mean, that's what it is. It's always IPCC finds that global warming is going to be 3.2 degrees centigrade by 2050 if we don't change what we're doing. But that's not what the IPCC people themselves say at all. And so, you know, there's a validity to modeling as long as you understand what the outcomes actually mean and what they don't mean. And unfortunately, the general public simply does not get that from the media reporting on them.
Yeah, and a lot of that modeling is coming from outlets that have a vested interest to get a certain result. Yeah. And I'd say this is related to, you know, the devolution of science in recent years, when science seems to have become not a way to learn more about the universe and the world and whatever, but to get a certain result, to get the result you want, which is the opposite of how science is supposed to work. It's like they start with a hypothesis and the desired outcome, and not everyone, of course, but a lot of people in science, it seems, just try to get to a certain result, which shouldn't be how science works. It's not how actual science works. You either prove or disprove a hypothesis depending on your experimental data, and so on and so forth. But
yeah, that's an extremely important point to make. And if I could add in there, like, for example, the IPCC had generated all of these different RCPs, which is representative, trying to remember the representative concentration pathway. And so they had these different scenarios that they ran, and 8.5 was like this extreme case that, you know, it was probably never going to happen. It was just outrageous kind of inputs that they put into it. And then they had a series of other ones that were more moderate and whatever. But the central banks and a lot of the different organizations took the RCP 8.5 as business as usual. Right. So they took an extreme case. Then they said that's business as usual. And we want you to try and model your business behavior and risk analysis around that extreme thing as being the norm. And unfortunately, a lot of the different groups that are supporting this, the different banks and financial institutions, as you say, Irina, they probably have a vested interest in having that as their extreme position, because there's this desire to shift investment financing or funds and financing to the transition. And no one's going to invest in a transition if they think, well, it's not going to be so bad. Why do we need to spend money on that? And so now they're working that extreme scenario into this business as usual for banking, which I find rather troublesome.
Right.
Stu, what do you think of all this?
I'm sitting here taking it all in this morning, and I'll tell you, the only time that I've ever met Bill Gates, I am so thrilled that I have it on my resume that I made that man so mad he had to go get therapy. I'll tell you what, that man is absolutely a horses. When we sit back and take a look at Microsoft, and we take a look at the hypocrisy that they actually stand for, they are built upon hypocrisy. Data manipulation now is actually getting into a completely scary thing. And in one of my stories for today was my interview with Fritz Brunning, who is on the CO2 Coalition now, and weather modification data they've found a way to do it. Can you trust any data? I don't trust a single thing that comes out of the United States government. Did I just say that? What about the EIA? They're manipulating the data. It is proven, and they're going, well, yeah, we did, in order to get a lower pricing and manipulating oil prices. why should we trust anything anymore?
No, we can't. And Wood Mackenzie is the latest to completely fall
Yeah.
in terms of reputation. Now they're modeling the climate too. Now they're warning that a 5-year delay to the transition will cause the global average temperature, this fiction of a metric, to shoot up by 3 degrees Celsius. Oh my God.
Let me ask the panel.
And then in another recent report, sorry, Steve, they're talking about EVs and how they're going to decimate petrol demand growth this year.
What?
Yes, yes.
Which is the diametric opposite of what is actually happening in the market.
Oh,
Yeah.
goodness.
Like,
I mean,
Yes,
it's
that's what they're saying.
180-degree opposite.
You know, when we sit back and we think, okay, we've got the modeling going on, and it's not like Zoolander, like we had on the intro slide there. Love Ben Stiller; he's absolutely a nut. And we sit back and we take a look at the modeling, and we take a look at where we are going from here. The banks are now having modeling issues as well, and there's now I think his name's Christian St. Clair. He says there's about 250 banks that may be failing in the U.S. because of the financial modeling going on and the Fed not being able to do their job. So it's not just climate change modeling that is having a problem. What happens if we have 250 banks in the U.S. fail again?
Ooh, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I think
Zoolander just expanded into the whole banking industry today.
we live
But
in a
it's
Zoolander
inextricably
world.
linked. It's inextricably linked to all of this, right? Because when you have an oil and gas development or any kind of business, you need financing unless you have a lot of cash there. And most businesses operate with some sort of debt financing, whether it's for initial startup or ongoing expansion or whatever. And so there's this link between what the financial services industry is doing, the banks and investors, and then how this plays out in the larger context of the economy, oil and gas industry, transition industries, and so on. But as I said, Mark Carney had talked about back in 2019, I think it was, where they need to shift 100 trillion of financial support and investment to the transition. Well, how are you going to get that? Because if you focus just on business models and everything, the conclusion would be, well, this isn't a good investment. I think we'll just stick with what we're doing. But so when you make it the only game in town, the way the standard setting is going and so on, there will be no choice but for companies to put their money into the transition. And the way to push them into it is to have these scenarios that are unreliable. And, the thing is, why not have a scenario and have one company do it or one bank do it for 5 years and see if it's working? Because none of these scenarios work.
There's a great example.
Experimental work. It's essential.
Right.
But I'm beginning to think that Mark Carney is just, throwing figures around. 100 trillion. We can't even get $9 trillion annually for the transition. And he's talking about 100 trillion. But about oil and gas companies and debt financing, it's a very good point you made. Did you guys see the surprise when Bloomberg reported it, that oil and gas companies are taking out less debt finance from banks because they have more cash? Yeah, they have more cash. Why do they have more cash? Because their products sell, because people need them. So people
they have
buy.
A successful business model.
Nobody expected this.
Yeah.
Oil and gas are becoming more independent. They're investing their own money into new projects. And this is a problem that nobody saw coming, because they expected that when they pressured banks to stop doing business with oil and gas, banks will stop doing business with oil and gas, and oil and gas will stop expanding production because they don't have, debt financing. Surprise, they have cash.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
it's a successful business model. Yeah.
Here's an interesting addition to that point. is that not only are a lot of oil and gas companies, at least the smaller ones, are they're trying to stop the debt financing, and they're going to private investment. And I think it was either the IMF, or maybe the BIS, put a note out to nations saying, you need to start regulating private investment so that it doesn't undermine the transition. And I thought, whoa, you want to control private investment so
that's what the
can
digital
support.
currency is all about. If they can
would
take
be
you
one
to
of
a digital currency, they can control everything you do, and they can force you to invest your money the way they want you to invest it. If they can the government controls everything through a digital currency, you won't be able to participate in society unless you behave the way the government wants you to behave.
Yeah, but that will not work, not at this stage in human history at all, because what Tammy is saying, it will just make oil and gas companies richer. Because once again, they're selling a product that is very necessary, that is vital, and you can't ban oil and gas just like that.
No, I don't think you can, but these people think they can. I mean, all you have to
Yeah,
do
they
is
think they
listen.
can do a lot
Yeah,
of things that are actually impossible, but
exactly.
they keep dreaming.
Yeah. I mean,
They'll
there's a great
try.
example. There's a Financial Times article, speaking of another formerly reputable publication that has gone crazy.
Yeah.
Financial Times articles written by a lady named Helen Thomas. It's not the same Helen Thomas that we've known for many years on the White House press corps. I think she actually passed away, but it's a younger Helen Thomas. Writes a story about the looming disaster in the EV industry. But what she does is she complains that, well, the car companies haven't gone all in on EVs only. See, the problem is not that the EV model doesn't work. It's that the car companies have not just gone willy-nilly all in to electric vehicles. Well, think about if Ford Motor Company had in 2021 decided, we're going to stop producing all our internal combustion cars, our incredibly successful line of SUVs and Ford F-150 pickup trucks and everything else, and we're going to put out this electric F-150 and this electric Mustang and a few other electric models, and it's all going to be great. Well, if they had done that in 2021, Ford Motor Company would no longer exist because they've lost something like $12 to $14 billion on their EV line because people don't want to buy them. People don't want them. And so if we did and Tammy had a great suggestion, we need to have somebody do this for 5 years, see how it works out. Well, let's try that with a car company like Ford going all in on EVs and letting them do it for 3 years and see where they are financially 3 years from now. And what'll happen is that company will no longer exist. And that's why they don't do it. It's an unworkable model that can only, but these people who are religious zealots where the climate's concerned, they truly believe they have the hubris inside them to believe that government policy can force markets to behave in a way that markets are not inclined to behave. And people like these zealots have made that mistake over and over and over again throughout human history. And the inevitable outcome is always a financial ruin. And that's really what the outcome of all this is going to be if we don't change direction.
Well, wasn't her big complaint the fact that all the auto manufacturers needed to do it at once? Like all of them had to stop selling profitable vehicles because then they'd all be in it together.
Yeah.
They'd
all fail at the same time.
They'll all fail at the same time because it'll be the only game in town. And so you will have no choice but to buy the EV. And then I think what would happen is that the used internal combustion engine market would go crazy.
Oh, yeah.
Because
the whole world would be
that's all
like
people
Cuba.
would want. Yeah, exactly. I keep thinking of that. And I'm trying to imagine the UK and in 5 years' time being like Cuba, people fixing their own old cars and not being able to drive because the emissions violate the town boundaries or something like that. And Yeah.
Yeah, it's already kind of happening because the Bulgaria and Romania are some of the biggest markets for second-hand cars coming from Europe. When Western Europeans used to change their cars every 5 years or so, now they're keeping them for longer because life is more expensive in Western Europe, and immediately prices on the second-hand car market here have gone up. Yeah.
All right.
Unintended consequences.
Let me ask the panel this, because I'm a little bit of a bonehead. The guy that a surprise, and the guy that just put out on Twitter said that he brought his Tesla in for a update. A, I love Elon. B, I absolutely want a Cybertruck. I don't need a Cybertruck, but I want one because it's bulletproof. And if you're a bonehead like I am, you need a
Just
bulletproof.
wait a couple of years, you're going to be able to get it for a little bit of nothing.
I think I've already got a 220 watt or volt connection for sitting right in my garage. So,
Yeah.
But when we get into this point of Elon, Jamie Dimon and Larry Fink just said in his annual report on March 27th, the world's most influencer said the switch to energy magnetism is that energy security is just as important in the move to net zero. He said, we still need oil and gas. So even Jamie Dimon just put out on his yesterday, he said, it's okay to invest in oil and gas. So here are the two biggest financial firms saying it's okay to invest in oil and gas. Where's the energy hypocrisy now?
Elon Musk says the same thing. I mean, Elon Musk has many times said publicly, we're going to need oil and gas for a long time. I mean, it's no mystery. The really smart people understand this. It's the crazy people that we have to worry about.
Well, I mean, you can't get a rocket to space with electricity.
No,
Just saying.
But Tammy, what if we get a big solar panel, put it in space, and then have a long electrical cord come down and have it tethered? That has been proposed.
I know. And there's also the other space-based solar where they beam it down to specific areas and fry everything on the way. You don't want to be a bird flying across, because it'd be like a huge laser beam or microwaves and just zap everything. But there's proposals out there and there's people raising money and they're getting subsidies and incentives to explore these ideas. So
without derailing the conversation, which I normally do, Tammy, what about the interconnects? Is it the Viking interconnect that has come online is now celebrating some big things in the UK? What is the cost per kilowatt transmitted, as it goes through there? Because it's been since 2019 to get this interconnect up and running. How in the world, if we can put an interconnect to support the UK, there's three big ones now, and they're bringing them in from Norway and the other countries. They're expensive and they're saving the planet. Right.
Yeah. They are expensive. I'm not really sure because the way they do the price these things is odd. So
I'm not sure if it's me or is it.
No, it's not your.
I'm afraid we're losing Tammy's connection.
Well, she looks good.
Yeah, sorry. I don't know what happened. It just
there we go. Now it's unfrozen.
I thought she was doing a Biden imitation for a brief moment.
Repeat what you were saying there, Tammy.
I'm not that old yet. I'm sorry. I have no idea how much the Viking interconnect is costing per kilowatt hour because the way the UK does their pricing is really odd and it seems to fluctuate. I don't know, but this is the problem with the UK, for example, is that they want to rely more on the interconnects than building their own power because it's so expensive to build their own power with all of the different planning requirements and whatnot. And my concern is that, like in Canada, they want to do the same thing where they're saying, okay, Saskatchewan and Alberta, you guys don't have that much hydro, just build up your interconnects. and import electricity from Quebec or Montana or North Dakota or something like that. And is it, well, what about security? What about energy security? Why would you want to be dependent on these long interconnects? I mean, the UK one, I think the Viking one is from Denmark. So what happens if there's some kind of sabotage that takes out that line? Now what? Right?
Yeah.
So how are you secure then? And I mean, granted, there could be similar terrorist attacks or whatever on your domestic infrastructure on land, but it's different than these really long interconnects, especially undersea, which is how Denmark and the UK are connected.
I would not want to rely on the United States for energy security under the current administration.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
that?
the countries that are importing your LNG, technically, they're relying on the U.S. for their energy security. So if you think that LNG is going to be cut,
I'm going to say this: there's a difference between an interconnect and importing LNG. Qatar is putting out, large amounts of LNG. And then here's a prediction. The Dark Fleet has been able to have a very significant impact on Russia's ability to be successful to avoid sanctions. And we are seeing now coming up with the advent of some LNG tankers coming in that you're about to see a Dark Fleet for LNG coming in so that Russia will be able to avoid LNG sanctions and still ship in some things. So,
they don't have LNG sanctions because Europe is one of the biggest buyers of Russian LNG.
Yet,
They're just trying to be sanctiony about it.
The interconnects are direct, and those are something. If you've got sanction and weaponization of LNG, there's other sources of LNG. So that to me is a significant difference, and hats off to Putin. He is an animal, and I don't agree with everything he does, but he's avoided sanctions very nicely in the weaponization of the U.S. dollar.
My understanding is that China has just commissioned 18 maximum size LNG carriers. Now,
building them for Qatar,
yeah, and I think
and there's over 80 under contract now. 80 new LNG tankers. What this is doing is this is creating a secondary market of older LNG tankers that was the whole birthing reason of the Dark Fleet. There's between 500 and 700 of the Dark Fleet. Oh, how funny. And so the Dark Fleet
great
came
comment,
about.
actually.
We love Joanna. Way to go, Joanna. Yay. And so the Dark Fleet came around because of the weaponization of the U.S. petrodollar.
Yeah.
And it's coming around on the LNG tankers. Everybody says, oh, it's not around on LNG. Watch.
Yet. Yeah, exactly.
Here's what I want to know about these long interconnect lines coming in from Norway and Denmark into the UK. What is the line loss percentage on that electricity?
A lot.
Because I know in Texas, when we transport wind through high voltage transmission 300 or 400 miles from South Texas up to Dallas, the line loss is 20% or more. These lines you're talking about have to be 700-800 miles long.
And under the
you're losing an awful lot of that electricity, and that's going to raise the cost.
A lot.
That's a lot, yeah. A fifth of the electricity. Whoa.
Yeah, it's a fifth of it. Yeah, and that's just a 300, 400 mile long line. Line loss is a real issue in the power sector that people don't think about enough. And and this comment from Joanna, it plays into that because she's right. AOC and the federal government are trying to coerce ERCOT, our grid manager in Texas, to establish interconnections with the other regional grids in the country. We have a standalone grid, and that's going to make us dependent. It's inevitably going to reduce the incentive for the Texas government to ensure that our grid is functionally sound, because we're going to be, ERCOT's going to be able to say, well, we don't really need that new generation over here because we can just rely on getting it from Arkansas in an emergency. Well, Arkansas is probably in the same weather emergency that Texas is in, right? The big
Right.
freeze in 2021. You keep hearing people talk about, well, if only Texas was interconnected to these other grids. Well, all those other states were frozen too, folks. We weren't the only frozen state, okay? We just had the only grid that failed. Okay, so we need to fix our grid, not rely on Arkansas and Oklahoma to fix it for us.
Meredith, Joanna's Tammy. Joanna is talking about Meredith Angwin, who was
Yes,
on who's visited, I believe, with everybody here, and I just love Meredith Angwin.
She's wonderful.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
and Joanna says here, Meredith's number 3 in the fatal trifecta over interdependence on a neighbor's grid, and that's absolutely right. And the thing is, when they had the Dunkelflaut in Europe, which is where you get the wind stopped blowing, and it was calm for weeks. And so if we were all interconnected between the UK and Germany and all these other countries that were all facing the calm weather at the same time, what good does that interconnection do? Now, it's one thing if you're producing reliable power, whether it's from nuclear or natural gas or coal or whatever, but what they're talking about is increasing those interconnects with renewable or unreliable weather dependent wind and solar. And
Right.
now maybe with France expanding its nuclear fleet, then they would want to be reliant more on France. And historically, France and the UK, maybe not the best partners.
That'll work out until the next war between them.
Gotta work it out.
Then it's a problem.
But yeah. So maybe we should get to the headlines today.
Yeah, let's go to the headlines. This is fun. Who's up first?
Yeah, let's get ready to rumble.
Whoops.
Okay.
All right.
Oh, these are mine. And the first one, the eco-friendly startups are turning to treeless toilet paper. This one's especially for you, David.
What's it made out of?
Bamboo.
Switchgrass.
We discussed sustainable toilet paper or toilet paper set. So let me just mention some of the names of these startups. So we've got Whole Foods, which is okay. Green Forest, and my favorite, Who Gives a Crap, is the name of the startup that makes alternative toilet paper. So basically, the story, the CNBC story is about one of these companies called Real Paper, which makes its toilet paper from bamboo. And take note of this sentence: bamboo is a grass, not a tree. And obviously, it's one of the fastest growing, and so on and so forth. So you can harvest it more often. I have a question. It sounds great.
Yeah.
Why hasn't anybody done it yet? Why do we still keep using lumber or tree fiber to make toilet paper? If bamboo is abundant, it is a grass, it's probably easier on the environment. Why aren't we doing it already? Probably because it's more expensive. I don't know. Yeah.
Or you have to do something to chemically bind it or something, maybe. I don't know.
Oh, imagine that. I have no idea at all. But they're saying it's got great promise. The alternative to sustainable toilet paper pantry is buying a bidet.
Yeah,
and
that's what I was thinking.
There's a debate about it, however, because using a bidet requires water. Right. So the story ends with the recommendation that if you live in a place that has got abundant water resources, then you're better off. You'll be more sustainable with a bidet. If you live in a drought-prone area, then you should use bamboo toilet paper. There's a solution to every problem these days. Yeah. And every problem is climate change.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, my next story was actually 2 stories in one. This was the first one. Big shell investors urge others to back greater climate action. and this was about, the shareholders meeting, and a group of shareholders, including a couple of large asset managers, European asset managers, calling on the company to, be more ambitious in its emission reduction plans. And lo and behold, who was the actual originator of the idea? It was Follow This, the well-known activist shareholding scheme. It wasn't the asset managers themselves who had this idea. They were just playing along with Follow This. But at the meeting, apparently Shell said that Shell was called on by analysts to return more cash to shareholders because it did so well. It had, a forecast beating first quarter. It's booked a net profit of $7.7 billion. So analysts said you should be returning more cash to shareholders. And Shell said, no, we won't. That just keep the current share buying program. Yes, why should you return more cash to shareholders who want you to not have these profits? Right. Meanwhile, at BP, the joke continues. Meanwhile, at BP, shareholders are calling for even laxer emission reduction targets. Large institutional shareholders want BP to not reduce its oil and gas production in the name of emission cutting.
Because they want profit. Of course.
Return on investment.
Yeah. What an odd concept. Yeah, so that was for me.
I just love that. Well, Shell, of course, is a company that the irony is just crazy, because Shell is one of the most aggressive companies in terms of reallocating a bigger share of its capital away from all the wind stuff and renewable stuff they had been investing in that was non-profitable, back to their core oil and gas business over the last 12 months. And the result is record profits. Mm-hmm. Gee, what a surprise.
Okay. The next one. Is this my story, or whose story is this one?
Not mine.
Stu, is that yours?
Not mine.
Okay, so then it's mine, because I sent this around earlier this week. Well, I wasn't sure because I put different ones in there. Yeah. So this headline says McKinsey, JP Morgan, Alphabet, and others signed $58 million biomass-based carbon removal deal through Frontier. And so when you read the headline, you're like, oh, okay, biomass removal. What does that mean? And then when you read the article, it's basically taking human waste or animal waste that you would normally, the animal waste you would spread on the fields or whatever, but they're going to put it underground. So they're going to take out stuff that you could be using as fertilizer or soil nutrients or whatever, and they're going to bury it. And I thought,
why?
Yeah, because that's removing carbon.
Was it methane in the animal waste?
Well, so when the waste goes into the field, even though it's putting nutrients back in the soil or whatever, it does outgas. There is a bit of outgassing. And I guess to prevent the outgassing, they're burying it. But you're removing those nutrients from the top layer of soil, and you're sticking it underground.
So we're not using synthetic fertilizers because they're made with natural gas, and now we can't use natural fertilizers because of gas.
This is just a recipe
but you're
for
supposed to do
people.
Yeah, the new thing is regenerative agriculture, which can be good, but you'll never get the same kind of yield, because it's like let's say, for example, you sow a crop of wheat, and then alongside your wheat crop, you also plant beans, because the beans will put nitrogen into the soil. Yeah. And so you get a complete field cover. You still have to use some kind of insecticide or herbicide or something, but it's supposed to put the nutrients back in the soil to help the wheat grow and all this other kind of stuff, which on the surface, it may sound okay, but I don't think that will create enough yield of what current farming does So it seems to be more of a niche sort of area, kind of like wind and solar is a bit of a niche, not for all that we need. But that's the trend. So it's rather concerning that, they're talking about soil degradation, lack of nutrients and whatever, but we're taking those nutrients now and putting it underground, storing it. So,
my goodness. Okay.
So that was concerning. This one, David, is this one yours?
No.
Stu,
I
is
put
this one?
in there?
The Daily Mail is yours, I think, Tammy. Isn't it?
No, I remember that David had, or Stu had sent this one.
Well, I had the G7 coal exit article in mind, but I didn't have the one from the Daily Mail, I don't think.
Who had data
these are
center?
mine. These are mine.
Okay.
All right. So then I'm not sure who that one was, but that one.
This one's David's.
Okay. So the G7 coal exit, of course, is the announcement by the G7 last Wednesday that that all those countries have pledged to phase out coal by 2035, but they put a couple of big caveats in there. First one is they're only talking about unabated coal plants, which, as they define it, is a coal plant that's not accompanied by carbon capture and storage projects. Okay. Well, the problem with that whole concept is that right now there's not a single coal plant in the United States of America today that has been successfully combined with a CCS project. Okay. So we're talking about an exception that the critics of this are saying, well, that gives the United States and Germany and Japan an out, except that they've never succeeded in combining those two technologies together in the United States. This is, by the way, the same policy the Biden administration adopted in its new clean power plan that's going to get overturned by the courts because it's not a proven technology. The second one is data centers now need a reactor's worth of power, Dominion says. This is a pretty incredible story I wrote about last week. That Dominion, of course, is a big power provider over on the East Coast. That we're talking about a handful of data centers that are being built right now in Northern Virginia. And I want y'all to remember that geographic location for a specific reason. Dominion said last week that just that handful, I think there's 5 of them, of new data centers is going to consume a nuclear reactor worth of power. That's a gigawatt of power for 5 data centers being built in Northern Virginia. Dominion also added that it has provided power is contracted since 2019 to provide power to 84 other data centers that are up and running. And those 84 combined use less power than these 5 data centers that are right now being constructed in Northern Virginia. And what I want you to realize about the geographic location of Northern Virginia is that it is home to all the alphabet agencies of the United States intelligence community, the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, and on and on and on. So those 5 data centers are most likely being built to service the needs of, helping to spy on all of you American citizens and probably citizens in other parts of the world. So,
wow.
Yeah,
Well,
that's
that
how
requires
much
a-
energy these big new data centers are going to consume, folks.
They're going to
Hey.
need nuclear.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, they are.
Absolutely.
you
And you're also going to have to stop retiring coal and natural gas plants to be able to supply these data centers.
Toby,
I'm sorry, Stu.
Toby Rice from CEO of EQT. I've reached out to him several times. I'd like to get him on this show. And he was on MSNBC, I believe it was Saturday. And I thought it was very enlightening of him saying that AI is actually going to cause a natural gas boom in
Yes.
energy and energy plants. And the numbers that he came out were 15 billion MCF of gas, which is 13 New York City equivalents of demand. Unbelievable amount of demand on the AI.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's
Unbelievable.
amazing.
Yeah, it's a lot.
That's a lot of
So
gas.
Brian Zinchuk had a comment here about the successful carbon capture plant, which is in Estevan, Saskatchewan, but it's never met its
okay.
planned capture rate. And one of the reasons for that is it was the first plant built, and they had a lot of sort of hiccups and engineering problems and stuff in the first, I would say, several years, which they've kind of ironed out a lot of those issues. And there's I forget which company holds the rights to the technology. It might be Shell, I'm not sure. But BP is actually working on a significant carbon capture project for the UK. And they're in like phase 2 or 3 right now, where they've done the sort of engineering requirements and whatnot. And so they're going to be building on that technology that was used in Canada. And part of the problem in Canada is that they've been working really hard to get the bugs out, but now the federal government says you can't keep it open. Yeah, that's right, Brian. Sorry, it's Shell. Shell has the rights to the technology.
Okay. Yeah, and
So-
ExxonMobil's working on several big CCS. I mean, CCS has tremendous potential. Okay. But the point here is that we're talking about a technology that in the United States anyway has not been successfully combined with coal-fired power plants, and that's a problem for this whole deal.
Yeah. And well, I'd be curious to see what happens this year with net power, if they can actually put that on a commercial scale, natural gas power plant and make it work.
Yeah.
But we'll see what happens.
We'll see. Yeah. All right. That's all for me.
Yep. The only two that I had rolling in on this, we got about 10 minutes to finish up here, it looks like. And anybody still having questions or something, just reach out there. And we love the comments. We've had some great ones from Brian, Joanna, LinkedIn user. I'm not sure who LinkedIn user was. We had John with his.
And Nathan.
Nathan, yeah.
Nathan, this one was a good one. Talk about line loss. Failed one of its Brent Mountain in Virginia.
Mountain
Wow.
Valley Pipeline. Yeah. Wow. I did not.
The Viking link was 475 miles.
Okay. So my geography isn't that good.
Quite a lot.
What happens when 250 banks will have a okay? Yes, we will. I'm glad. Thank you for that typing error there. Okay. Real quick, interviewing Fritz Brunning again. He is on the Carbon CO2 Coalition with Gregory Wrightstone, and Gregory Wrightstone's a cool cat. And when you sit back and take a look, is CO2 actually bad for the planet? That's a whole nother discussion. But the data being manipulated is mostly done in Antarctica. And there's 23 sensors. I'm just stupidifying this down for me. So that there are 23 sensors. And if you've got negative 100-degree range in Antarctica, it's easier to only pick on 20, and it changes the entire world's numbers for an average of the hottest summer. That to me was amazing. More on that later here. Doc, this one, net zero's days are numbered. Why Europeans are souring on the climate agenda. Dr. Penny Presser spoke about this in the UK, and I found this is there's an interesting quote. The game is over for anyone willing to commit industrial suicide through the implementation of net zero policies. We're seeing that with the deindustrialization of Germany.
Yeah.
Going to the site Public Opinion.
And the UK.
And the U.S. I mean, the only reason it's happening. Here is some of the things he says. We've been telling the public for 15 years this will be very expensive, and your energy bills are going up because of the renewables. This is all too abstract for people. They don't get that. I mean, this cool cat on this one on energynewsbeat.co. This article, he's got a YouTube video in there, and it's pretty funny. And to follow up with that from last week, life after net zero. This is, I want to give a hat tip to the great Tammy Nemeth, the founder of the Nemeth Report. This is life after net zero. And then in honor of David Blackmon, he said, no, this is actually life before that we get there.
Yeah, before we get there, because we're going to have a financial calamity that causes it. Yeah.
Yes. And then Irina and I are already thinking ahead and planting our gardens. So, we're already thinking all along on all this kind of stuff. So, hey, real quick, I want to give an update here. This one, if we remember, we talked about a little bit about the Teslas, and this is just a little bit of a recap. When you had the carrots, I found one, and it got a little bloody on it.
Without further ado.
Ow! Ow! Oh my goodness. I need me one, but I don't want that one. All right. The next one is, let's say that
before you go from there, this is the Ford Edsel of the EV world, folks. Take my word for it.
All right. Before we go to the next one here, I'm going to tee up the next one. And that is, let's say that net zero is on an airplane. Okay. We're on an airplane. We're on net zero. And what happens? Let's go to the plane. We're on a plane. That's net zero. Boom! Look at the guy in the back. I swear, just because he's small, looks like me, everybody's looking around.
I love that.
So, anyway, I thought that was pretty funny. All right, let's
so
go to the next one here.
who do the pilots represent? Who do the pilots represent?
Well, that would be all the
Mark
proponents
of the world, and the Bill Gates.
Mark Carney's. Yeah.
John Kerry. I love this one.
Yeah. I'm old enough to remember when young people pretended to care about the environment. Those days apparently are over. That's the UCLA campus after
Some
it's
really
been trashed
cared.
by protesters. Huh?
Some really cared. And I think young people, children still care about the environment.
I think they do.
They get
But
brainwashed
not the
as they grow
protesters.
older.
Well, that's it for me.
Okay.
Well, damn. By the way, unidentified LinkedIn user is
It's Travis Lynn.
Lynn. Yes.
Travis.
And we had a couple of others. John Lindbergh, Meredith Angwin doesn't suggest that interconnectors are themselves undesirable, just that overdependence on them makes a grid weaker. It is important to be able to utilize resources outside a local grid to compensate for occasional deficiencies. And
yeah, I think that's what Meredith was saying. But I guess that's an important point, is that you can't become over-reliant on these things. If you become over-reliant on any element, whether it's all natural gas or all coal or all nuclear, you need to have a mix. And in order to ensure that in the case of a worst case scenario, you've got enough built up and reliability into the system.
Yeah.
And overdependence can be an issue.
John Lindbergh, yes, we have two already, one to Oklahoma and one to Mexico. Yes, ERCOT does have two limited interconnects, one to Oklahoma, one to Mexico. I think, though, the one to Mexico, we actually export more energy than we import on that one. On Oklahoma, I don't know anything about it, but I know it exists. And then John Lindbergh, I'll go with more generalized ocean surface temperatures increasing as indicative of concerning climate change that is unaffected by a few sensors. I'm not sure what that was in response to.
It was to one of Stu's headlines.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, the Antarctica ones.
Okay.
Well, you can't trust the data.
A lot of comments, guys. A lot of good comments. Thank y'all.
That's
Great
awesome.
job,
Thank
Tammy.
you. So we have one last little video we're going to run, and it's Michael Schellenberger speaking about some of the good news regarding the planet. And so, Stu, did you want to play
Sure.
that last video?
You bet. Love me some Schellenberger. He is a cool cat.
Climate change is destroying your future. Carbon dioxide is accumulating in the atmosphere. Global warming is killing the Great Barrier Reef. But there's more to this story. Over the last decade, total global emissions declined. Deaths from natural disasters have diminished to a few hundred a year in the United States, even as the global population quadrupled over the last century. They've declined internationally by over 90%. The Great Barrier Reef recorded the highest amount of coral in 36 years, and maybe longer, because that's the amount of time that we've been studying and measuring. How come nobody is saying that? You've all heard the news.
Great points. Yeah, nobody talks about the Great Barrier Reef anymore.
No.
Well, they do
Yeah.
talk about coral, that it's dying, it's bleaching again, but I think they're just going on.
Things go in
Well, 'cause-
cycles.
Yeah, they move and they go in
Yeah.
cycles.
Or the great plastic patch. Still trying to get Dr. Patrick Moore to talk about the plastic patch, Pacific plastic graveyard or whatever. So,
Yeah.
Anyway.
I was listening to a podcast on the weekend. I forget who it was, and they were mentioning when they had the oil spill in the Exxon Valdez, and they said that it was going to destroy the ecosystem for 1,000 years. They'd never be able to get rid of all the oil, but there's bacteria. It was the same thing with the Gulf of Mexico one, right? And they anticipated that it would be this real big disaster forever. But there's bacteria in the water and in those regions that actually got rid of a lot of the excess oil and residue that was there. So it's amazing how the earth can deal with these kinds of things, because even though people do stuff, nature does kind of similar stuff too. And
we keep underestimating nature. That's what we're doing.
yes,
We just keep
absolutely.
underestimating it.
And overestimating our ability to control it.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. We're being exceptionally arrogant. We are.
Thank you, everybody, for the great questions today, and to our ever witty panel. And look forward to next week. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.
Have a great
Thank
week,
you all.
everyone. See you
Bye,
next
everybody.
Monday. Bye.
Bye, everybody.